Welcome to the Lighthouse Podcast, a resource created by Lighthouse Family Retreat to strengthen families that are living through childhood cancer. You will hear stories from families, educational information on childhood cancer, and most importantly, we will encourage your family during this journey. Hello everyone, it's good to be back with you this week. Christy, we are in the middle of Christmas season, and I want to go there because It's just fun to go there. Christmas season is a big deal for you. You've got tons of trees.
I do. You have to have a tree per room. It's kind of that's what you're looking for. So when you walk in every single room, there's Christmas.
Holy moly, a tree per room.
Yes,
and I don't even want to get into how many rooms you have in your home. We are slowly catching you. We don't have a tree per room, but we have since knowing you.
Yes, I've been a great influence.
We have added trees in our house where we have now multiple.
Yes.
So it's not a tree per room, but
Come
we do
along,
have
people.
We do have multiple. One of those is a real one. We do one real tree, and then the rest are not real. They're the fake trees that we can put up around the house. So thank you for sharing that. I just love talking about Christmas. Christmas season is just so much fun. So hey folks, if you are following along in our Advent calendar, it is the 15th of December, and today your activity is to share and highlight anything that was an accomplishment this year. And for us, the Advent calendar is actually our accomplishment this year. This is our first time doing it. So I hope you are having a great time if you've got it and going through it with your family. We have been doing that, and it's been a lot of fun as a family. So Christy, it's also a great day when we get to sit down with some great friends. And so we're here today with Cliff and Tracy Atfield. As parents, they have been where you guys are, and that's traveled the journey that some of you are currently on. And they're going to take some time to share really what helped connect them as a family through this. And so we're going to step into some time with Cliff and Tracy. Cliff and Tracy, so excited to be sitting with you guys. Christy and I, obviously, we know a ton about your story. We're big fans of you guys. Y'all have been serving with us at Lighthouse for years. But not everybody listening knows your story. So let's start there. Why don't you guys give us a little bit of background about you, your family, and just a little bit of the story that got you to why we'd want to sit down with you.
Great. Why don't you start? I'll go way too long.
Okay, that's probably true.
We know how this works.
Yes. So Cliff and Tracy Atfield. We have two kids. We have Kirsten is 23, and she is married to Spencer, and they live in California. And Trey is 21. He's a senior in college, which is crazy to think about. So we are relatively empty nesters, which is really fun, honestly.
And empty nesters with kids that, this may sound funny or weird, I don't know, but you can go out and have a drink with and just enjoy, and it's all legal and no big deal. Have a glass of wine.
Was it weird?
That was weird the first time. Yeah, it's great, but it was weird.
Yeah.
But it is fun. I mean, they're just at a super fun stage right now, and I don't know why, but we just got a new puppy, and so when we're empty nesters, and then we just saddle ourselves again.
So now you can't just pick up and leave.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was a really good idea that we should have done. But anyway, so that's where that's kind of where we are right now, life stage wise. Trey was diagnosed when he was 6 with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, so ALL, and so that was our initial connection into Lighthouse. So Trey was 6 at the time, Kirsten was 8.
Gosh, that's crazy to think. 21, so 15 years ago.
Yeah, 15.
Wow.
Yeah. It's crazy.
It's been a while now.
So, and that's what I think part of him being in college now, and I mean, Christy, you know what this is like, you're like, oh my gosh, like, he's doing this. You know? And so it's really exciting.
And he's doing great.
He is.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's awesome. And he's at it's still Sanford.
Sanford.
Junior?
Senior.
Senior.
So senior. He's going to do a master's, so he's going to stay one extra year.
Okay.
But yeah, he'll actually graduate with an accounting degree.
Darn overachiever.
Gosh.
Accounting. So sort of following in your footsteps. Because you mentioned earlier you're a finance major.
I was finance, but she was actually accounting.
Oh,
so
you were accounting.
Yeah.
Really following much
career.
more close to mom.
Yep.
How about that? I did not know about that about you. That's new to me.
It's true.
Oh, okay. So do you do your own taxes?
I do, but TurboTax is amazing.
Yeah.
Because I've never done taxes. Like, that's not my thing. But
folks, you guys are listening to the tangents that are going to happen the entire time here.
And Katie's making notes where to edit.
way too long.
We are so comfortable and love the Atfields. We'll just go on all kinds of crazy tangents. So that's not relevant to why we're here, though. So tell us about just the process of when you guys got diagnosed, because you weren't here,
No,
because we're in Atlanta, you weren't here yet.
Correct. Yeah, we were in Dallas, Texas at the time, so we lived in Dallas. And Trey was a healthy 6-year-old boy playing flag football, like just the normal kid things, first grade, And it was one of those things that just kind of came out of nowhere. And so we were actually out of the country at the time when he went into the hospital. Grandparents were watching him, which,
Wow.
yeah, it probably took us a little bit to get grandparents to watch our kids again for us after that experience. They're
grandparents
like,
were saying
okay,
that.
last time you watched him, he got cancer.
Yeah.
So that was kind of how we got into this a little bit. So yeah, we did not see it coming. There was no signs. So it was just like, he got sick. We don't know what it is. And then...
And everything,
Yeah.
pretty much for us, right? Sick to diagnosis was like 3 days?
Yeah.
3 or 4 days?
So that's very
Fast.
different than a lot of other stories we hear.
It
Right.
was very quick, and doctors figured it out real quick.
Yeah, it was one of those things that we came back from, and we were actually in Europe. We came back from Europe and went direct from the hospital, or from the airport to the hospital, and it was like we got there and it was like, that kid in the bed is not our kid.
Yeah.
Like he was that sick.
Yeah.
And so it was for us like, what happened?
Yeah. And we didn't
But at that
know-
point they didn't know what it was. We just knew that this is serious because that's not our kid.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's how bad. That's
So
how
they
sick
didn't
he
even
was.
know at that time it was leukemia?
No, they had figured out he had a staph infection and pneumonia, and we knew at that point that was the case. But even when we started asking doctors, it was like, oh, okay, so we know. They were like, no. And we're like, what do you mean? They're like, that's not all that's going on. We can't figure it out. And so we're like, oh, okay. So that was the confusing part for probably maybe about 24 hours after we got home.
Yeah.
It was really confusing. And then,
Yeah.
then of course they ask, hey, we think you need to talk to a pediatric oncologist.
Yeah.
And you're like, those words don't belong together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. Definitely 2 words you don't like to hear together.
Yeah.
Or even,
Yeah, or
you
apart,
never
but-
like oncology.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No.
Because it's like, wait, that means cancer.
Yeah.
And, so regardless, that's just a word that you don't like to hear.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you, because it was such a short deal, you didn't have the time to do all the research that we hear a lot of probably other parents going, hey, you're hearing from weeks from their doctor, oh, it's no big deal, let's try this. Like, yeah, it's not that. I just know it's not that. So you're Googling and you're researching. And even in the, when you guys were doing it was like 2005 and you didn't have the smartphone. There was no iPhone to just pick up and
couldn't
start
Google all
Googling
your-
things,
Yeah.
right? And so you didn't have the opportunity to do the research and kind of get prepared for what it. So what were your main concerns? Like when you heard that pediatric oncology, what are you thinking? Like what goes through your head as parents?
What doesn't go through your head is probably... I do remember, though, our doctors, and we had a team of doctors, and it all felt like they played a very, very specific role. But the doctor who told us, she got told first. I was picking up Kirsten at school. But when the doctor came back to talk to us, I remember him specifically telling us a ton, like a lot of stuff. And even when he was telling us, he had a hint already of the type of leukemia that Trey had. And he was basically like, hey, if this was going to happen, this is the kind of childhood cancer that's better than anything else to get. I know that's like such a hard concept to get.
Yeah.
But he was already contrasting for us between ALL and AML and other things. And so that certainly, if there was any sort of help to bring to that or reassurance to bring to that, there was at least some of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't stop your mind from going crazy places real quick, that's for sure.
And it's such a crazy thing to hear because we were told the same thing. Like they were almost excited, like, "Hey, it's ALL," and I'm just to get your
like,
mind around the
what?
fact that that's like a good thing. That there's
Right.
anything about
Yeah.
this that's a positive. It takes you a minute.
Right. You're like, but you still said cancer
Right.
and my
Right.
child.
Right.
So it really,
So how can that be good at all?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Well, and our doctor even used the metaphor. He was like, hey, it's kind of like you got to take a bullet. This is the bullet you want. And it's like, what? Wait, I don't want any bullet. Like, what do you mean? This is the bullet I want. But that was
Yeah.
part of how he told us,
Wow.
which makes a lot of sense now. But
Yeah.
Yeah, it does. Obviously, understanding and knowing all the different types and stuff, but
Yeah.
still, when you're getting that news for any parent out there, and I've heard the same thing, it doesn't help, even though they're meaning it to help.
Yeah.
Do you remember talking to your kids about it? Like and Kirsten, I've known her not since she was 8, but for a long
We've known her
time.
for a long time.
She's an impressive, I always felt like she was way more mature beyond her years and just this great kid. So she probably understood quite a bit. I feel like she probably had the capacity for that. But do you remember having the discussion with them about what this meant and what this was?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think with Kirsten, she can be very logical, and I think her thing was like, I want to talk to the doctors. And we're like, you're 8.
Yeah.
But she did. She was like, I want to
she
talk to
did.
the doctors
And
too.
we told the
Okay.
doctors she wants to talk to you, and they're like, okay. And so they sat down and had conversations with her, because she's like,
wow.
okay, so tell me more about this. Like, so this is cancer in his blood. And so, she just had, and they were basic questions. They were an 8-year-old questions, but she had them and wanted some confirmation and stuff about it. So we definitely had conversations with her specifically, because her world is totally flipping upside down. In that. But then also the conversations of her kind of like, so what does this mean? And it's like, I don't know yet
I
what
think
it
that
means.
was the hardest stuff.
Yeah.
To not be able to give a child any sort of, barely any clarity, certainly no certainty.
Yeah.
That was the real difficult part, I think, for her at that point in time. Well, and for us, but still.
Yeah. And then Trey, he was so sick for a long time, he didn't understand or care other than, when am I going to feel
When I
better?
feel better.
Yeah.
And
He
there
asked you
was
some pretty good questions pretty early on.
He did. That dude. He's sometimes it's like you're thinking like, what's really going on in your mind? And there was one time he was in the hospital and he's like, Mom, he's 6. He's like, so if there's a special woman God has for me to marry, what happens if I die?
As a 6-year-old.
Wow.
And we had never talked about him dying or like, that was just something we didn't talk about.
Right.
Like, did we have those thoughts in our head? Of course. But we'd never communicated that to either one of the kids, you know?
I think for us that
So
was
that
just almost
was-
proof of like, he's thinking about a lot.
Yeah.
He's getting the
He's our
gravity
only introvert.
of it.
So when he doesn't express stuff, we're just like, well, maybe he's not thinking about it. It's
Right.
like, no, he's thinking
it's
about
He's thinking
going
a
on
lot.
there. He's
Yeah.
just not
Yeah.
sharing it. That's wow.
What did you say?
I don't remember. I was probably like, well, buddy, okay, God, what words do I need to say right now?
Because you didn't get prepped for that one.
I
mean,
know.
Yeah.
I don't, honestly, I don't remember what I said.
I think it was something, I kind of remember, I thought it was something around kind of like, well, I'm sure that if he's got a plan for her, he's got that all figured out.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a
But-
good answer.
Yeah.
It's a great answer on the fly. I
Yeah.
gotta tell you.
Hey,
Man,
that's
what
the
a
spirit.
deep question
Yes.
from
I know.
a 6-year-old.
I know.
Well, Trey, if you're listening, kudos, bud. Good job with the questioning. Questioning skills are top notch.
Yeah. It's hard too when
yeah.
they ask questions. Carter, it was a little bit into it before Carter started asking, like, what if this doesn't work and things like that, because they kind of train you to be honest with your kids, which that took a little time for me, because I was all about ready to, like, I was fine with lying about some things. Like,
Positivity.
honestly, I was ready to
You're
like
like
gloss some
optimist.
stuff over.
just going
But when
optimism.
they
Yeah.
ask you and you're standing like making dinner or whatever, and it comes out and you realize that you're supposed to be honest, but then you also, they're kids and they're little, that's a really hard, they don't write a manual
Yeah.
for how to handle that.
Yeah. Well, how much is safe to tell them, and
Right.
what is good for them to know versus what do they really not need to know?
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a hard line that I feel like we, struggled with a few times with questions.
I'm sure. Yeah, I mean, you guys, so you're parenting through these ages that they're still, learning how to do all these different things, how to interact in the world. What does discipline mean? What rules do I follow? What don't I follow? You're parenting them still in those early ages. And so when you think back on that, what were some of the challenges of trying to continue to parent them the way you had probably talked about wanting to parent them, and now having to do that with this inserted into it, because it was going to change the game a little bit? How did you adjust, and what did parenting look like in parenting these guys in the middle of this when they were elementary ages?
Yeah, it's a good question.
It felt,
for it, honey.
it felt like a tag team. I mean, we probably shared more parenting during those couple years than we ever have. It feels like we certainly share parenting, but it feels like things ebb and flow between which one of us is doing what at points in time. But Trey was in the hospital for the first little over 3 weeks, right? And literally we switched nights every night. And so one of us would go pick up Kirsten from school. We'd come back to the hospital. The other one would stay the night, and back and forth. And the other one would have her at home that night.
Yeah.
And so we were able to do that. I think that helped us a lot. It also forced us to talk about stuff, which was great because, you get in rhythms and you don't always talk about stuff with your spouse, and you're, trying to figure that out. But in a very positive way, we didn't feel like we had a choice. So that kind of helped us as well. And I think some of it was like, how do we create any sort of sense of normalcy for Kirsten? There's not going to be a way to create a sense of normalcy for him for a while. That's just not an option. But how can we try to do that for her? So that was something we tried to concentrate on.
So what did you come up with then? Because you're in the journey, you're in it now, so you're in it for 3.5 years, right, with boys.
Yep.
So what did you guys come up with and thinking through how to create some consistency and normalcy for her in this season?
Yeah, I think part of what Cliff said of us trading off created some routine for them. And I will say, as a mom, it was hard for me because I wanted to be at the hospital 24/7 and I wanted to be home 24/7.
Yes.
And so you have this conflict of like, I can't be everywhere and, oh my gosh, I'm going to ruin my kids and all this. Well, that's where God's like, hey, you're not in control anyway.
Right.
I'm like, oh yeah. Good reminder. Thank you.
Good reminder. Thank you. I need that daily.
Yeah. And I think it allowed each of us to really invest in our kids, for them to see like, oh, mom and dad take care of us, which was a really good lesson. But I think as far as like, yes, the way we envision discipline and, a schedule and all of that, totally out the window.
Yeah.
Absolutely out the window. And, honestly, with Trey, it was really hard because, Christy, this with steroids, and anybody who's listening who knows about steroids, your kid becomes like a crazy person that you're like, that is not you. And so with that behavior, you're like, everything in me wanted to discipline him, but yet he couldn't control it.
Yeah. And in a good way, the doctors are like, hey, you can't. You can't discipline him for this. He has no idea what he's doing.
Right.
And he has no way of correcting his behavior. That's not going to happen.
But then you have his sister watching him be this horrible child.
And
you're going to let him get away with it.
Yeah. She's basically like, I cannot believe, like, if
how
I
did
did
you let him do that?
Right.
If I did that, I would be in trouble.
She's not there yet to understand it fully,
Yeah.
right? Because she's still only 8, 9, 10 years old.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the...
So, you had the whole, like, if I did that, I'd be in trouble, and if, all that, and you're like, I'm trying my best. That's what I felt like as a parent. I felt like we kept trying to go, we're doing our best, but of course you can't tell that age kid.
No.
They're like, whatever, in my world right now, this is
you're
what's
not
going
doing
on.
very well.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if you knew how hard we were trying. I think as I think of discipline, as I talk to parents who are kind of in that right now, of just like, hey, give yourself some grace. Like, you need to give yourself grace as parents, because you can't do it like you want to do it. That playbook is out the window.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, with our scenario right now, what does that look like? And how can we honor each other as husband and wife and make sure we're on the same page? Because when it comes to disciplining your kids, if you're not on the same page, they know.
Right.
Yes,
They will play you.
I do remember us still asking, though, like if they would ask something, it was kind of like, did you ask your mom already? That was always that was still a pattern we kept.
Yeah, so we tried to keep as much normal as possible, but there's some things that you just have to be flexible on. And parenting and schedules and that kind of thing was one of those things for us.
And it's daunting because, especially for what our sons had, you're looking at a very long time. Like, you're not looking at just a short term, well, this is just for 6 months or this is just till the end of the, they're 6, they were both 6 when they were diagnosed, and you're thinking, okay, they'll be done when they're almost 10.
Right.
You know,
like,
that
this is going to be a third of their life.
Right.
by the
That's
time they're done.
Carter wasn't even really tying his shoes well, and I'm thinking he'll be done. And they told me, in 4th grade. I'm like, he's in kindergarten. Like, he's just finishing kindergarten.
Yeah.
That's such a long period, especially when your kids are little. It feels very, very long. Now that time seems like nothing, but. Right. It's such a long period to look at. I'm a planner and I like to look ahead, but I couldn't because it was so daunting to think, is this right now? Do I have to do this right now? And is it going to get better? And you don't know in the beginning if it's going to get better.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it does get easier and you kind of figure things out. But to try and plan parenting or anything like that, knowing that this is going to be this much time of your life is just mentally daunting, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what did you guys do for you? And when I say for you, I'm really, there's a couple different pieces of that. For you as a couple, because you talked about that a little bit a second ago, or at least referenced it, and then individually even for you, just on the personal self-care side, and then also on just the marriage care side. Like, how did you guys navigate that? Because I have 3 kids and I've gone through those ages without childhood cancer, and marriage was, you had to work on it, right? It just everything going on with all the kids and all the different things happening and all that, and then you add this in. What did that look like for you guys?
Well, I'll start with the self-care piece, because I think it's the self-care helps the marriage piece, and when you have a sick child, it's like kind of the first thing to go is your self-care.
Yeah.
Because you're like, hey, I got time for that later.
Right.
But not right now, And so I think it took a while to get into a cycle of that. But I think for me personally, it was kind of, it's still the same things. It doesn't change when your kid has cancer, but it's like, how am I going to stay spiritually healthy, mentally healthy, mentally, emotionally healthy, and physically healthy? And so, it's just figuring out a new routine for that. And kind of going back to giving yourself grace, giving myself some grace.
Yeah.
I'll say
at the same time, it's not going to go.
Yeah. It's not going to look exactly like normal.
Yeah.
Physically, like that was a struggle for me at first because I would find myself sitting. Trey would be in the hospital and he'd go to sleep, and I would sit there. I had a trail mix that I'd buy from the little snack shop downstairs, and me and like a People magazine, just to totally take my brain out of real world and snack mix. And I was like, So about 10 pounds later, I was like, this has got to change. So that was a way of me dealing with stress that I was like, that's not healthy. Like, that can't keep going. So, unfortunately, it happened, and it's like, okay, let's change that and reevaluate and do something different. Yeah. But it came to simple things like, for staying emotionally healthy, I know for me, it's getting outside. So it's like, go walk outside in the parking lot. I would literally go walk outside the hospital parking lot just to get some fresh air. So it's all different things. But yeah, I feel like it's the same. You just have to adapt.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you said give yourself grace. I also think you have to give yourself permission because it's not that you don't care. It's just it feels a little selfish. Like, okay, I could go walk outside. Or for me, it was food. Like, I just never went to the cafeteria. I was like, it's so far away. It was not far away, but it felt like, 8 floors down or whatever. And Carter's sitting there in bed, and I'm just like, no, I'm just going to stay with him. And then days would go by, and I'm like, yeah, I haven't eaten since like Tuesday. But it feels like your whole self is just caring for this child, and so it feels weird to say, well, I'm going to do this thing just for me that's going to make me feel better. It doesn't feel natural for a while.
But
so you have to.
Yeah, it's the put your mask on first sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it sounds so cliche, but
it is.
There's truth to it.
There's so much truth to it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then if you're not with a child at the hospital, you're thinking, I need to be, or I should. The shoulds like totally take over. I should be doing this with my other child or with my husband or with my friends who are doing my laundry and cleaning my house.
Right.
Like, I should go do something for them. And it's like, the shoulds can totally take over.
Yes.
And I think you have to just let those go.
Or maybe you're texting the husband that's in the hospital every 5 minutes because you're worried because you're not there, and you just maybe don't trust what's going on without you. I mean, maybe
that's happening
for
somebody
for
else
other
out there.
people.
I've heard from others.
Yeah.
I've heard from others that that's what they do when they're home with their other children, but that can take up a lot of your time also when you can't get your brain on anything else.
Yeah, Eric probably doesn't know what you're talking
No,
about.
I'm sure he never. No, not at all. I think I've been told several times, we got this, stop calling kind of thing. And as far as marriage, I know that you prioritize that because I knew you all before I knew that Trey had cancer, I met you first. And it was a couple weeks before you told your story. I remember going home and telling Eric, okay, that you were teaching a class and I was in it, and I was like, okay, Tracy and Cliff, their son has cancer, and they're so normal. Like, they come every week, and they're energetic, and they all that stuff. And then I don't know if you remember this, but you came to see me in the hospital really early. Like, we didn't know it was leukemia, but we kind of thought it was, but we had to wait for testing. And I remember you said something to me. You told me not to, I was asking you all these questions, like firing off, and you said, don't get ahead of yourself. You don't have a diagnosis yet. And then you said something about marriage, and I heard you, but at the same time I was like, why is she telling me this right now? I know. And then later I was like, she's so wise. But at first I have to say I was a little bit like, no, that's not on my top 100 right now. Like, Eric will be fine. I'll just catch up with him later. I got something going on right here.
Yeah, which is true. You did have something going on right there.
I did.
But you also have Eric, who is your spouse.
Right.
For life.
Yes.
And that lasts longer than what happens in the hospital, which that's a hard concept when you're in the hospital.
Yeah.
It is.
Well,
Yeah,
you
it
just
really
even
is.
brought up, you're going to be in this for a while.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, well, hey, if your if your kid's going to be sick for a week or two, you're kind of like, yeah, whatever, we figure it out, and you can pivot and go do that. But when all of a sudden you're in for like, oh, it's going to be years. Okay, now what do we do?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you focus? I mean, did it take you a while to focus on that, or? I mean, you just always seem like you have it all together. So maybe you just knew that instantly.
That's so
but how
natural.
did you come? I'm like, how far along did you get before you're like, yeah, we got to start focusing on this here?
Yeah, I don't know that it was long before we thought that. I mean, we did have, for us going in, we had regular date nights. We spent a lot of time together. That was already kind of habit for us in a very positive way. The thing I remember about things like that and like how to concentrate on each other was, again, it was kind of like your same comments about this has just got to look different. So, like, how do you go on a date even when you get back home?
Right.
And your kid's home, but he can't go anywhere. And you're kind of like, now what do we do? Can we leave him alone? And we would have friends that would actually come watch him. But instead of going out maybe to dinner and a movie and going on a 3-hour date, it's kind of like, hey, let's just go to the store together, the grocery shop.
Yes.
But if you can, it was almost like if we can turn some of these things that we have to do into kind of like, okay, how do we go have some time together, and actually try to talk about something other than the kids, then I felt like that felt important. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think what you said about letting friends watch the kids, like, because there's something in you that's like, I will do it the best. And letting people help you is sometimes really hard to do because you're like, I should be able to control this. I
Yes.
should be able to handle it.
I can still do all this.
Yeah, like I can be Superwoman, he can be Superman. But to let friends come and help, that was a little bit tough sometimes,
Yeah.
And I think to let them come and stay in the hospital and stay with Kirsten and Trey while we went to the cafeteria and had dinner together. Like, it sounds so minor, but it's so important. Walk down in the hall together holding hands and go have dinner in a nasty hospital cafeteria.
Right.
But it was still time, and it shows value to our kids of, hey, we're
Yes.
still going to value each other, even though, like, life is crazy. They need a solid foundation. And so it was kind of that, like, how can we provide a solid foundation for them? And that's what they knew was us. We made a point of like, hey, you are going to have babysitters because we're important. And so that was just part of what they knew. So that seemed normal to them.
Yeah.
It felt
Yeah.
selfish, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what you were saying. But that's.
But they'd seen us doing it for
They'd
years,
seen
so
us.
it wasn't just completely out of the norm.
Yeah. And we are not perfect. So when you said, as you share that, I was like, oh, girl, there's so much there. So yeah, it's always trial and error. And it's always that, like, coming back together to be like, okay, what's working in this, what's not working? And having that communication is so important. But even in that time, it was so easy, like you said, of just letting things go. And we'd have to stop and be like, we need to talk about that. We need to talk about what's going on, So it was just keeping that a priority.
Yeah. I would imagine as you were talking about just the whole idea of letting friends, do stuff, because it's not easy to say yes, right? And we hear
Well, we
that a
like
lot.
to be the ones to help.
Right.
We want to be that
Yes.
person,
Yes.
not
And most people,
recipient.
most
Yeah.
people are usually like
I
that.
think I would imagine if you're a friend and you get told no so many times, you stop asking.
Right.
Well, and I think
You know?
this was maybe a benefit on our side too that we were certainly not in control of, but we had friends that didn't ask. Like I mean, in a positive way, right? Because, and I've done this too. So I've done this sort of thing where you're kind of like, hey, if there's anything I can do, let me know. More than likely, you're not going to get an answer
Right.
to that, right? But instead, we'd have somebody show up and kind of go, leave.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Even if you guys just run to the store and grab something, or I'd come home and the lawn's mowed, and I'm like, well, who did that?
Yeah.
I honestly
You
never
never would
knew.
have said yes if somebody
No,
said
if they would have
Totally.
asked me, I never
Yeah.
would have known.
Yeah.
Same thing. We'd come home and the laundry would be done, and you're
Yeah.
like, who did our laundry?
Yeah.
That's personal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are very good friends. Or if they weren't, they are now.
Yeah. But
And they're still friends.
Yeah.
and I think one of the best parts about it too, one, they never asked, they just did, and we never actually even knew.
Yeah.
So we would thank the masses, if you will,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was.
So what I hear there is really for two different groups, right? If you're a family that's going through it, don't get in the rhythm of saying no,
Oh,
because if you
gosh, yeah.
say no too much, people aren't going to keep asking.
Yeah.
Because they just know what your answer is going to be.
Yeah.
And then for those that are listening that you're a friend through this, go and do. Don't ask.
Yeah, just show up.
Obviously, don't get too much and start breaking down their deck because you saw a rot or something. But
Right.
go and cut
Yeah.
grass,
Yeah.
or show up at the door and say, hey, we've got your kids tonight, or just show up at the house, knock on the door with food. It can go in the freezer if they don't eat it that night.
Totally.
Yeah, just go and do. Don't necessarily wait, for them to just say, oh, hey, we could use some help with this. Because most families are just like you. I know you talked about it as well, Christy, the same thing of you're not really just going to start going on and asking for help.
No. you
Yeah.
won't. Well, and like Christy, even when you mentioned when Carter was sick, that's the reason Tracy just went.
Yeah.
Like she didn't ask.
Right.
She just went.
Because if she'd asked, I probably would have been like, no, we're
I'm
fine,
fine.
you know.
Right.
But when I
Right.
saw her there, I was like, thank you. So,
Right.
just to see her, because I
Right.
knew she knew stuff. So, yeah. And I've done that to a few people, and I would have never done that, honestly. That's not my personality at all. But I have heard of people through friends, like, hey, my friend, and they're at Showa. And I've
just
actually
go.
showed up, and they don't even know me. You at least, we knew each other. And I at the time, I'm like, why am I doing this? But I did. I just showed up, and I'm like, hey, you don't know me, but we have a mutual friend, and I'm just here to answer questions. And my son was that age or whatever, and I would have never done that before.
Well, and we didn't know any better. The only reason we knew to even do that is because people had done
Right.
it for us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that wasn't like some magic secret
Right.
that
Yeah.
we had and figured that out. It was, oh gosh, what was most helpful to us? People just showing up.
Yeah.
Good. Well, that's great, and I hope
Presence.
that folks hear that today and do something different.
Yeah, I especially in that light of that, thinking about single parents, if I'm like, my heart just is like, I don't know how, I so respect
I don't know how
single
you do that
parents
with a
that
healthy
because
job.
I don't know how
Yeah.
you do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
with so much going on in the world, and so for single parents, I so hope that they would regularly accept help from others.
Yeah.
Yes.
You
Absolutely.
know, because they, especially at least ones that I've known, they're so much like, I've got this.
Yeah.
You know, and they want to be strong and all of it, which we all do, but it's like accept help.
Because
we all
this is
need
definitely a lengthy, no matter what your child has, it's a marathon.
it is.
Like, you're not going to be able to do the whole thing without some help.
Yes, which is so humbling.
Yes, it is.
It's such a humbling place
Trying
to
to be dependent.
But I feel like I'm a
right.
better person on the other side. Like,
Totally.
I would have maybe passed over things before thinking, well, it's private, or I don't want to bother them, or things like that. But now I know how to help, and I know to just say, hey, I know you have clinic Tuesday, so I'm going to have your kids, instead of, do you want help with your kids? I'm better at it. I'm better at accepting help, but I'm also much better at giving it, having to be on the other side.
Yeah. Well, I hate to wrap up. One more question, and then we'll finish out for folks. But looking back, and there's parents listening right now, and they're new to this, right? This is brand new, and they're at the start of that tunnel that you guys have been through, and they can't see the light yet. What is one piece of just advice that you guys learned from a marriage perspective that you would share with them now? Almost like you're showing up to see Christy, right, at the hospital. What's something you can share with them that's going to help them get through whatever the length of time their journey is, whether it's leukemia for 3.5 years or if it's a year of treatment with some other childhood cancer? What would you share with them?
That's a good question. One piece. I think for me, as I think about it, like, I know I really valued certainty in life. But there's a lot of, this really brings up uncertainty, and it makes you kind of go, okay, like, what can I trust? And
there is no certainty in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know for me, like, for us, like, we have a trust in God and trust in Jesus as our Savior. And it's one of those things of, I'm like, I don't know what we would have done without that, because our trust and hope in Jesus is, I think, really what got us through. Because when you look at our circumstances, they weren't good.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like you look at the world that we live in, and it's not always good. And so I think for me, just kind of going, hey, what am I going to put my hope in? And for me, it was, who am I going to put my hope in? And it's actually, I have a tattoo that says hope, and that's kind of where that came from, because I really wanted to remember who my hope is in. And so just my piece of advice, I would say, is, you know, a lot of things in this world are not certain. And so I would just really kind of question and go, hey, what is certain in your life? And I know for us, that's Jesus, and everybody has to answer that question for themselves.
Yeah. You guys have used a phrase that I've stolen and used many times because it's just so appropriate. And you've talked about having hope in something bigger than, not having hope in, but having hope in something bigger than just a cure, but having a hope in Jesus. And I think that's just so appropriate.
Yeah. Because
you're right. You're in a world of just such uncertainty. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think my first thought goes to, you have to talk to people. It feels like, especially with dads, there's so much that goes on in our heads. And you think, I'm the only one that's having these crazy thoughts.
Yeah.
And you're not. You have to talk to your spouse, and you have to talk to other people. It's going to be really hard to kind of let some of that stuff out and to ask questions. And, you know, if you can find other families that are going through some of this too, that's great. But even your other friends. But let some of those what you think are crazy thoughts out, and talk to people about it, and talk to your spouse about it.
Yeah.
Staying up in your own head, it doesn't help the situation at all.
It makes it worse.
It makes it so much worse, and makes you feel isolated and alone, and you're not. You're not. But trying to figure out how to get outside yourself in that was huge for me.
That's just great advice. So dads listening, man, listen to that. You're not the only one. You're not alone. So Cliff, thanks for sharing that.
And moms that don't like talking about their feelings. I'm just going to intersect that in there. I mean, I'm just saying, there are moms out there. There are some out there that find it difficult to talk about hard feelings with people. Same thing. Super important.
Very important. You're absolutely right.
Yep.
Cliff and Tracy, thank you guys so much. This was great. Thanks for opening up the door to a little bit of your story and sharing it with everybody. Sure. I know it's going to be really beneficial for them. We've heard it, but it's always great to hear it again. It's it's just fun sitting with you guys. And we really appreciate y'all.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Pleasure being part of it.
To everyone listening, if you want to learn more about Lighthouse and the resources we have to support families going through childhood cancer, just visit our website at lighthousefamilyretreat.org. We are grateful you joined us today, and we will see you later on the next episode of the Lighthouse Podcast.